to the first of our 5 questions on your scaling strategy, the why question. Why do you actually want to scale? And there are a few sub-questions you should ask yourself and your team and find answers to. The first one is, what do you prioritize, impact or revenue? Of course, in an ideal world, a social enterprise or an impact organization would be able to fulfill both functions, right? To generate a lot of impact and generate a lot of revenue. But our experience is that usually these are 2 pathways, and somehow you need to make a decision. Why does your organization exist? Are you truly kind of in the game to solve a societal problem, or do you actually want to create a sustainable business with, some impact? And both pathways are completely fine, of course, and it's really up to you, but you should make a clear decision about that. Because it also will have effects on how you plan and develop your scaling model. Should it produce some kind of financial returns for you or not? Or is it designed in a way that spreads the impact faster and wider, but without generating additional revenue? The second question would be, if you're really in for the impact, how systematic are you going to be about solving a societal problem? And sometimes social enterprises tackle really pressing issues, such as, for instance, climate change or discrimination of people with a disability in the workplace, or some other issues that are connected to many different, societal rules, regulations, relationships, perceptions, etc. So if you really want to solve such a problem, you should be clear about it, and you should clearly outline the problem you want to solve. The next question would be, where does this problem exist and to what extent? Is it a problem that occurs only in very specific regions, countries? Is it a global problem? Is it a problem in development countries? Is it a problem in, developed welfare states, etc.? So really trying to understand the extent of the problem and how you want to contribute to solving it. Attached to that is the question of the target group. Are you talking about millions of people that are affected by the problem, or smaller population because it's very specific? So try to determine the size of the target group in your home country, but also in a global context. And then at the last stage, you should be able to ask yourself, does it need a systemic approach to solve a problem? There are some resources on system change that you will find in the module documentation that you can download, and you can read more into them to find out what we mean by systemic change. Basically, it means not to just treat symptoms, but to understand how a social system is actually causing a problem. What are the rules, relationships, resources, actors that are working together in a way that causes this problem, and how can you as a social enterprise, and maybe with an alliance of social enterprises, affect these systems? So try to contemplate on these questions, and then find your own why. So let's look at the next question. What is it that you actually want to scale? To answer this question is really crucial for deciding on your whole scaling strategy and the model you will apply. There are different options there. The first option would be to replicate your whole organization. That means the complete impact and business model attached to this organization, and to recreate it in another region or country, usually by branching. So you build up your own branch and employ a CEO, or by social franchising, for instance, or maybe in the context of a partnership network. The second option would be to replicate a program, and by program we mean a more complex offer that consists of different components. For instance, a public awareness raising component, a training component, an employment integration component. So something that is more complex, but that can be adopted by another organization without needing to change the identity of this organization. The next thing would be to zoom a bit more in, so to say, and choose a very specific product, service, or format even. So really a very small component that is maybe more easy to replicate and adopt and can be shared more easily and freely with other organizations. Then there's also the idea that if you have an organization that is really driven by very strong principles and values, that this is actually the core that you want to replicate, right? You want to spread these principles and values, and you want others to adopt them and to kind of use them for their own work and to guide their own work. And the last option would be, and it's probably the most complex option, to replicate a system change strategy. So this needs a bit more explanation what we mean by that. Imagine a solution that really changes how a social system in a specific sector works. An example from real life is the social enterprise Buurtzorg from the Netherlands, which is a mobile care provider. They completely changed the way mobile care works, reorganizing how it works, implementing self-organized groups of nurses that more or less manage all of the work themselves, with a very low overhead team that just coordinates the work. And the way they worked made it necessary to change the funding mechanism for mobile care in the Netherlands. So they had like a 10-year period where they lobbied a lot, advocated for their model, until regulations actually changed. And now mobile care is working differently in the Netherlands. It changed from a very hierarchic system to a self-organized system in many places. They still have competitors that do it differently, but they changed it. So replicating this kind of approach means that you have to be ready to invest the same kind of energy in another region, in another country, to change the system in a similar way. So be aware of that if you have such a fundamental solution for a social system. To decide which offer you actually want to replicate, it's useful to ask yourself a few questions. The first one would be, how innovative is it? And does it bring a competitive advantage for my partner, my branch CEO, my franchisee in another region or country? Because, you know, the first thought of somebody adopting your solution will be, do I get something similar in my own country? Are there offers in my own country? So if you want really to bring your offer to a new region or country, it has to be different to what already exists there, because you have some disadvantages as you're not part of the sector, you're probably not well networked in this new region or country. So innovation is really key. Second thing is the impact potential. There are many offers and initiatives by companies, NGOs, etc. But usually they don't really prove and document their impact very well. So this is a big advantage if you can show what your offer actually achieves. And therefore you need an impact model. And I forward you to the impact measurement module of AIR to find out more how to develop one. So you really should set up an impact model, and you should have indicators to measure your impact and ways to report on your impact, so that your partners can transparently see what your offer is actually changing for your target groups and for society in a wider sense. The next thing is the business potential. Of course, it's more attractive if your offer comes with a business model attached to it, so that your partners can have additional income or are, better off at fundraising through your offer. The next thing is documentation. This is really important. It's clear that you and your team know exactly how to implement your offer, but others don't. So you would need to make sure to have an offer that is very well documented, formalized, and that comes with a package of support offers, from manuals to trainings and consultings, so that your partner really knows how that works. This is also important for creating a good partnership relation, because you can really show your partner what it's about. Your offer becomes more transparent, they can assess it themselves and can decide whether to adopt it or not. I already said that support is really important. So professional social enterprises usually provide some light support to their offers. And this depends, of course, on how you replicate. If it's a social franchising system, your support offers are maybe more than if it's just social licensing. And if you open source your offer, well, then probably you don't offer any support at all. And the last thing is you should choose an offer that comes with a formal framework, that comes with a partnership agreement, with a licensing agreement, that comes with transparent conditions on how partners are supposed to implement it, what they should do, what they should not do, and what actually the roles and responsibilities are. Let's come to the next key question for your scaling strategy. How are you going to scale? Or in other words, which model do you want to adopt to scale your solution? We see a continuum of different models, and a good way to explain this continuum is to show the two extremes. So one side, the left side, would be models that provide a lot of direct impact and a lot of control. So things where you, as a founder, as a social enterprise, have a lot of control over what is happening, how it is implemented, and which kind of impact it achieves. But more control also means that it's probably less flexible, it's sometimes slower, and sometimes it's actually more costly. Examples would be setting up a branch or merging with an existing organization. So setting up a branch, of course, means that you need to set up the whole infrastructure you need, the office, you need to find and recruit a good manager for your branch, you need to introduce all the processes. The branch will be connected to your accounting, to your financial management. So there are a lot of processes going on where you need to invest for that. But at the other hand, you have more control over what is happening. And it may take, of course, more time to set up branch after branch. So usually it will be slower. Let's go to the right side of the spectrum. On the right side, you achieve a lot of indirect impact. And remember one of the first slides I showed you with the two curves. A social enterprise is often limited in its capacity to provide direct services to target groups. So finding models to work together with partners that implement your offer will dramatically increase your impact. And that means that you have a lot more indirect impact than direct impact. So on this side of the spectrum, you have less control over what is happening because you share with partners and they implement it. But it's more flexible, and often your offer will be adapted a bit by your partners. It can be faster, and it often costs less because you can build on all the infrastructure that your partner have already available. What is also important, your partner don't only have infrastructure, they have also networks, they have fundraising mechanisms, so you can rely on a whole system that is already in place. The models that are possible here are really open sourcing. So for instance, putting a manual online how to do a specific thing, and people can just do it, implement it, download it. But there are also other ways to achieve a lot of indirect impact, campaigns, where you trying to convince people to change behavior in a certain way. And you can also set up networks or very light training and consulting where you're basically spreading a specific model that you're promoting. Think of a consultant that, for instance, trains other organizations to use agile management methods. And by that, he's spreading these methods, and then they continue to use these methods on their own. So it's indirect impact, but of course, a consultant will have no control over how this is implemented after he or she is leaving. And in the middle of the spectrum, there are ways to scale that are often used by social enterprises because they provide a good mix between control and flexibility. These are called, affiliation. So you affiliate with some other partner. Usually this has a formal component. So some kind of agreement, contract, and partnership. There are different ways. There is a certification where you kind of certify, for instance, a certain training method. And if others want to apply the same training method, they receive the training from you, and then they pay for the certificate, and then they can continue to use it. Membership means that you form a membership organization where organizations pay a membership fee, and they become part of this network and can benefit from your offers. Then there's classic partnership. We saw this as an example for Teach for All. So this is a classic partnership network. The partnership is maybe aligned by a similar vision and mission, and maybe by core or flagship programs and approaches, but the partners can remain fairly independent organizations. And then there is social franchising. As we said, this was the case for Dialogue in the Dark, where you really provide a whole package consisting of an impact model, a business model, in their case, a modular exhibition layout. And if you do this, you also take the brand and you implement it, and it's quite clear how to implement it. There's a framework, there's a manual, but you benefit from this package actually. And then there's social licensing, which is a very light way of affiliation. Usually this is about smaller formats, services or products that you license to others, so they are able to use and implement the same formats, maybe receiving training from you, maybe taking your brand or not, and they will usually sign a license agreement, pay a yearly license fee, which are basically very low in the social entrepreneurship field. So we're talking about maybe maybe 2,000 euro for smaller licensing fees, but of course this can be more. And this depends, of course, on the complexity of what you're licensing. So this spectrum is really, really important. So sit down, meditate, and ask yourself, what kind of balance between direct and indirect impact do I want to achieve? What balance of control and flexibility do I want to achieve? And this highly depends on what it is that you want to replicate. Just to give an example, you might want to replicate an offer for a disadvantaged and very vulnerable target group. For instance, how to work with women that experience domestic violence. In this case, it's really important how your partner works with these women, because working in a wrong way, applying methods wrong, can have negative effects, of course. So they have to have a certain skill set, they have to adopt certain values and a general approach that fits your vision and mission, and also your quality standards. So in this case, if the target group is vulnerable, or if your solution is very complex, you probably need a bit more control. If you have a very easy solution, at the other hand, which can be copied easily and that you want to spread real fast, then you can really decide to open source it. And there are also good examples for doing that. So please look at what it is that you want to replicate and then decide on the model. So now we're getting closer to your actually scaling strategy. Well, you decided on the why, on the what. Now you made up your mind about the how. And you can ask yourself again some critical questions, and I'll read them to you. Consider the advantages and disadvantages of all these models. How much control do you need over your solution? Will you be able to give implementers sufficient ongoing support, or do you not want to invest this kind of effort? Will the replication model work with your organizational culture? So is your team actually ready to go big, to set up a new branch, or maybe work together with other organizations who may not completely be aligned with you and your organizational culture? Will you be able to get the monitoring data you need, the impact assessment you need? Will the partners be able to sustain themselves, or should they be able to sustain themselves with the business model that you provide for them? Can you imagine to fundraise for them or with them? Will you be able to protect vulnerable beneficiaries? That's what I said before. If you have a very vulnerable target audience, you may need to have more control over what is happening. And if not, you have to be very careful in providing others with the ability to use your brand actually. And consider some resource constraints. Do you have enough funds to make this type of replication work? So social franchising means high upfront investments on formalizing your whole approach and getting the legal advice, etc. Do you have the skills and capacity required for this model? So it's a big difference if you need to train your partners, need to fundraise for them, or just open source, and share with them. Does the model meet your expectations for financial returns? So that's really important. If you want to achieve financial returns, you need to be very clear about the type of organizations you can actually work with that can actually pay you licensing fees or social franchising fees. And is your business model strong enough to provide for that? Because they have to cover the costs, and in addition to that, they need to pay the fees to you. So make up your mind about these questions and try to select the best model and get ready to test it. So we're coming to the next question. Where do you want to replicate? This is a tricky question. We know from experience that social enterprises often follow opportunities that just pop up. For instance, somebody in a country contacts you and says, well, I think your approach is so innovative, I'm really interested to bring it to my country. And usually you're flattered by that and you say, well, of course, I will support you to bring that approach to your country. And then you are in some country that you never assessed and you're not sure whether your solution, your offer makes sense there. So this is often what happens. And the other way is that there is funding. You know, funder is interested to bring a solution to a specific country, and you are inclined to go with that, to get the funding. Sometimes this will be unavoidable in a pragmatic sense, but be sure to shape your strategy where you want to go. We saw, for instance, in the example of Insanely Human, that they decided to go to a certain region with a common language, the DACH region with Germany, Austria, and parts of Switzerland. And then from there, they went to other neighboring countries when they made the first, effort to translate their materials, for instance. So this could be one consideration. So let's go through the whole list of potential considerations. The first one would be, the problem. Does it exist in another region or country? To which extent? In which kind of social systems is it embedded? Are the root causes the same as in the country of your origin, where you are active? Are the same stakeholders involved? Who is trying to solve this problem? Is it acknowledged by stakeholders? Do they perceive and acknowledge the problem? Is it a part of public discourse? Is it featured in the media? So all of the things you can look at. You can do this by desk research or ask some experts, but find out how the problem is present, how it is similar, and how it is different. The second consideration would be stakeholder demand. So do you think that there are stakeholders, partners, funders who are in demand of your solution? Again, do some test interviews, ask them questions, on how they perceive a problem, on whether they think there are already solutions available in the country. So don't just pitch your solution, as something that is innovative and great. Try to be more investigative. Try to really find out how they perceive the problem and the availability of existing solutions. The second would be, or the third would be strategy. So as I said before, the why is really important. So try to align with your strategy and try to stick to it. So if you decided to go to a neighboring country because the language is the same or the cultural context is the same, try to stick to this decision as best as possible. The next consideration would be compatibility. This means how compatible is your solution to, for instance, the cultural, the economic, the legal context in the new region or country. And this necessitates a bit of a broader investigation, and maybe you need to collect some data, and you again need to talk to some people who are really familiar with the sector. So try to find out if there is cultural fit. Will people accept my offer, my product, my service, my program, and what could be reasons why they don't accept it? Then there's a relative advantage. We said this before. So if you go to a new country, there will always be existing offers. So you need to make sure that your offer is innovative, stands out, has more impact, provides a better business model, because any local stakeholders, before looking to another country for a solution, they will probably look in their own country for a solution. So make sure that you outline really well what is special about you. Then of course the partners. Are there organizations, individuals, entrepreneurs that you think you could work with? And last consideration, of course, is there a business and funding opportunity? So how does the funding model work in my own country? Whom do I need, to pay for my services? And how could that work in another country? For instance, is my target group still able to pay for my services? How much are they able to pay? Are there foundations present who could co-finance? Are there big corporates that maybe have CSR activities or we could partner with, etc.? So that's really important. Are the conditions there to implement the same business model, or do you need to adapt the business model? So think about these questions, and then maybe come up with a first short list of countries that feel feasible for you for some testing. It also helps to make an assessment scheme. So there could be some general indicators that refer to some of these questions. For instance, the cultural conditions, the economic conditions, the condition of the target group, the size of the target group, and then maybe some more specific indicators that are super relevant for your solutions. And you could compare different regions or countries based on your assessment. And this is an example you see by Discovering Hands, which is a German social enterprise. And they use this to assess different countries and where they will go next with their solution. So of course it's a big step to go to a new region or country, so I want to give you a few tips that you should consider. The first one is assess your scaling readiness. It's a matter of fact that many social enterprises are scaling, but that they're not really ready for it. They don't probably have the capacity, they don't have the leadership, they don't have the strategy in place, the model is not really well defined. So make sure that you did your homework and that you're really ready. And a good indicator for scaling readiness is, did you achieve to scale this in your city, in your region, in your country? And when you achieve this, maybe then the next step is to go to a new country. So try to achieve scale in your own environment before going to a new one. Assess the new country or region. So really try to come up with an assessment scheme for your particular solution. Do not create a legal entity right away. So this is comes with some legal efforts, costs, etc. You probably need to recruit somebody right away, not knowing if it's actually possible to adopt and adapt a model for this specific region or country. So in the private sector, this is much more common, to establish a branch in a new country. In the social enterprise world, it's much better to find more smart and lean ways to explore a new context and to work with partners differently before really making this investment. Create a budget and try to estimate replication costs. So replication is costly. It will take part of your time. It will take time away from your day-to-day business. So make sure that you have this freedom to follow up on such a process. And usually for your first attempt to go to a new country, this can easily take 1 year at least, or 2 years, or maybe 3 years. So make sure that in particular when you were replicating for the first time, to have the time, to have the budget. Use specific fundraising opportunities for transnational activities. Some social enterprises are quite successful in using EU projects that enable, the exchange of best practices, maybe some replication exercises. So look for these funding schemes on European level and try to utilize them for your purpose of testing your replication model in another country. Try to get a person on the ground. So I think at the beginning it's really very, very important to have a reliable person on the ground that understands your approach really well, is passionate about it. Could be a volunteer, could be a pro bono consultant, could be an intermediary that you're affiliated with. So anyone that really is able to support you making your first steps, making the first assessments, finding some people you could interview where you could find out more about this country, maybe giving you access to some data on this country, sharing insights. So this is very important. And over time you can think about engaging this person more, creating a role around this person. So I think that's really important to think about that. So for social enterprises, it's often very important to work with stakeholders. maybe public stakeholders, foundations, other organizations active in the sectors, networks, umbrellas, etc. So you need to connect with them, you need to build a relationship, and this takes time and needs follow-up. So you need to make yourself known at first, right? So either this is your person on the ground having this job, to knock on doors and create these relationships, or you as a founder and CEO could support this person and pack it up for the real important meetings. And finally, replication takes time. It's never fast. So in the first attempt, you will see that you will need to revise your application model. You need to revise your offer, maybe your formal agreements. So there are a lot of things you will need to re-engineer to really make it happen. You will find out about a lot of details, with which partners you can work well, with which not, and there may be some failures. So count in a bit more time and have the patience and endurance to do it. There's one exercise we propose: really try to do a stakeholder mapping in the country or region you want to go to. So which kind of stakeholders are concerned by the problem, which are actively addressing the problem, which are maybe posing a barrier to dealing with the problem or make the problem worse. So try to map them out, try to identify them, and find your position in this network of stakeholders and find kind of the right way in to really replicate your offer with partners and to do something that these stakeholders can accept. Let's get to the last question. With whom do you want to partner? I think this question is crucial. Even if you do branching, it will be highly crucial which kind of branch manager you will select. Many things will depend on this person and the role and how this person fits with your organizational culture and what you want to achieve. But it's even more relevant if you work with external partners, organizations, or even work with other social entrepreneurs. So let's look into that. As I started to kind of outline, there are different general types of partners, right? There is maybe a group, a community or network that may multiply your solution. So it's really the individuals, groups, and for instance, if you open source your solution, they will be the direct customers, and they can directly adopt your solution. A second option is that you work with an individual entrepreneur, maybe a person that wants to start a social business and is maybe not entirely sure how to do it, with which model. And you provide this person with a proven impact and business model, for instance, and say, well, we can help you set this up. It will make your journey to become a social entrepreneur much easier because we did all the development work. So this is an option. From experience, we can say that you need to have patience because it takes a while until young or new social entrepreneurs become capable to really fulfill their role, because it has so many facets. They need to fundraise, to organize, to coordinate, to recruit. So there's a lot of things to do. So you may need to help these persons. And for some social enterprises, this investment is too big. It takes too long until this person is up and running. Or you choose a very experienced, maybe serial entrepreneur you work with. Another thing is, of course, to have a branch and to recruit a CEO. Another option is to work with an existing organization, which is something that we would definitely recommend looking into at the beginning. If you have a program, a service, some kind of offer you think you can share with an established organization, I think that's a kind of easy road, because they are already established, they have their own funding models, they have their own networks, they have access to the sector. So there's a lot of groundwork already being done, so you can benefit from. So that's great. But of course, an established organization will have its own identity. It will probably not be aligned with all of your values, with your vision or mission. It will have different agendas. It will probably not contribute as much resources to your program than you would want to. So there can be a lot of problems. And therefore, it is also very important with established organization to set up a very good agreement and to make sure that they have the internal capacity and motivation to really invest in your program. And usually that means they set up at least a project management function for it and really have it in their budget and in their day-to-day work routines. And the last option would be, you find a public body or public intermediary who from the start is able to adopt and maybe mainstream even your solution. So it really depends on what you have to offer, but there is this option. So if you have something that is really attractive, a program that might be attractive to public agencies, you can really try this route. It will take a lot of relationship and trust building, of course, and you need experts to get to know the sector and to get access to the right public players. But these are basically the options, so think what fits best to what you want to replicate. There are a lot of characteristics of a potential partner that you can have a look at, and this maybe will influence your recruitment profile. So previous qualifications, previous experiences, values, interests, statutory requirements. So is this a non-profit, a for-profit? Can it take money easily? Can it deal with your business model? Can it pay out money easily to other organizations? What's the financial situation? Do they have a financial outlook that's quite solid? How do their offices look like, their technology, their infrastructures, their legal structures, the language, etc. So there are many things, not all might be important for you, but make sure that you have a checklist in place and make it transparent to your partner so that they know what resources are required and what skills. As a last step, we would recommend you to create a partner profile that consists of 5 different steps. The first one would be to define the criteria for successful replication. What requirements are necessary, what steps are necessary to make your application successful. So what resources have to be available, what needs to be implemented, etc. And for which of these steps do you actually need partners? So what are you doing yourself? What kind of support can you provide? And what kind of commitment do partners have to bring in, and what kind of resources? The next step would be to define general categories of possible partners. Which types of organizations, which types of individuals, what should be their background, their characteristics, their skill set, their facilities, their resources and networks, and so on. Next step would be to really find these people, use your contacts in the new countries, use intermediaries, maybe even use social networks like LinkedIn to find people that fit this kind of profile. And start to approach them, talk to them, investigate their interest and whether this profile really fits with what you want to do. The next step would be a more thorough fit analysis. So what are the synergies between you and this partner organization or individual in terms of resources, operations, etc. What's the cultural fit in terms of leadership, organizational culture, communication, etc. And is there a strategic fit in terms of shared vision, mission, and goals? And then there can also be other criteria that are really important for you that they need to meet, that are very specific for your solution. So try to summarize this and really create a thorough partner profile. This is really crucial. So without the right partner, it won't work. And if a replication fails, usually the reason is that the partner was not the right one. Maybe they show initial interest, but then it turns out they don't have enough resources or the competences to really go forward, or the endurance, etc. So really make sure that you invest a lot of thought and time into this step. And never forget to leave the office, leave the building, and talk to real people in the field. So find out what they are thinking. Don't pitch your idea, listen to them. Listen to what they want to achieve, why they might be interested in the topic, in the problem, what their profile is as an organization, a social entrepreneur, what their goals are, and then see if you can offer something to them that has value, and then create that relationship. So we are at the end of this series on scaling strategies. We discussed some examples and the 5 key questions. and we gave you some exercises that will help you to develop a scaling strategy. And we think that's really important to structure your thinking, but remember, don't get stuck in strategy. For each of this component, it's really important to talk to people, to intermediaries, to get as much information from outside sources as possible so that your assumptions are as realistic as possible. And before investing a lot of money, try to set up things in a way where you could test, in pilots, where you could test relationships to individuals or partners, where you could test customer response. So try to stay lean, try to test as much as possible, draw your conclusions, and try to be smart about scaling, and always make sure that you know why you are doing this and if you're ready to do this. Thanks so much for following us. This was the module on growth, transfer and scaling by AIR. My name is Alexander Kesselring. I work for Ashoka, and I hope you enjoyed this series. Bye.